The year is 2013. Barack Obama is beginning his second term as president. The Baltimore Ravens just defeated the San Francisco 49ers to win the Super Bowl behind Joe Flacco's MVP performance, and Gautier's Somebody That I Used to Know just won a Grammy. It's also the final days of Scott Housen's reign as general manager of the Columbus Blue Jackets. Over his 6 years as GM of Columbus, he's amassed a respectable record for their standards, taking the Jackets to their first playoff appearance and amassing an overall record of 179 wins, 190 losses, and 59 overtime and shootout losses. He's succeeded by the very first European GM in NHL history, a young, strapping 47-year-old named Jarmo Kekalainen who would lead the Jackets through the next decade. How did his reign go? Let's find out. Kekalainen steps in at an on time for the Blue Jackets and the NHL as a whole. The 2013 lockout just ended and a 48-game shortened season is underway. It's February when he's hired, but he still has a couple of months to wheel and deal, bringing him to his first major blockbuster at the trade deadline. It's a 6-player swap with the Rangers that's focused on one crown jewel, Marian Gaborik. He'd been almost a point-a-game player for the Rangers, but had begun to show some signs of slowing down recently. The Blue Jackets may have been last in the Central Division, but they still had an outside chance at making the playoffs in a wildcard spot, and Gaborik looked like he could help out their scoring woes. To get him, all they had to trade away was a couple of futures along with Derek Brassard. Seems like a good move. And he compounds it by making another shrewd move with Calgary, trading a 5th-round pick for Blake Comeau. Yeah, he's had a couple of down years, but he was a 20-goal guy a couple of years ago in New York. The Jackets do make a late push and get above 500, but unfortunately they miss out on the playoffs. Both Gaborik and Comeau are gone next year, while Brassard plays for 4 years in New York as a middle six center, and is a part of the Rangers' Stanley Cup run. And the trades were good in principle, they just didn't work out. He's a young GM, I'm sure he'll learn and recover. Lucky for Kekalainen, he is walking into a stacked situation. Thanks to past years selling by Housen, the Blue Jackets entered the 2013 draft with 3 first-round selections. Unfortunately, none of them are high enough to get the elite prospects like McKinnon, Barkov, Seth Jones, and Josh Morrissey is taken just 1 pick ahead of them at 13. But they used the pick fairly wisely to select Alexander Wennberg. He spent a solid 6 years in Columbus as a middle six winger, before eventually moving on to Florida and then Seattle. Pretty good value for that pick, I have to say, although you might have liked to have Ryan Polak or Nikita Zadorov, who were taken immediately after him. Okay, we're at pick 19. You got a lot of really good options here. Anthony Mantha, Andre Burakovsky are both still on the board. Both great prospects to pick from. All the top goalies are still on the board. If you want to take one of them, who's it going to be?
Columbus Blue Jackets are proud to select from the Windsor Spitfires, Kirby Reichel.
Now, at the time, this wasn't seen as a huge reach since Kirby Reichel was projected to be a mid to late first-round pick, but yeah, passing up on Mantha and Burakovsky, who went just a few picks after this, no bueno. Alright, it's a bit of a dart throw here at pick 27, but let's see if you can find a diamond in the rough. There are still some good prospects out there.
From Bratislava, Marko Dano.
And Marko Dano was not necessarily one of them. Ranked by most as a 2nd round, maybe 3rd round player, this was a reach by the Blue Jackets. The fact that Jason Dickinson went 2 picks later and Ryan Hartman got drafted right after him is a bit of an oopsie. Oh, and you also passed up on JT Compher, who was projected to go into the 1st round, but ended up going on day 2. Still, 1 out of 3, not terrible. But Kekalainen wasn't done. He made a swap of picks with Pittsburgh that allowed him to trade back out of the 44th overall pick to acquire pick 50 and an extra 3rd round pick in this draft. That 3rd round pick ended up being the best player that the Blue Jackets drafted in this entire class, Oliver Bjorkstrand. And you were still in a good spot at pick 50 with a bunch of future NHLers still to be drafted. Unfortunately, you didn't draft any of them and took Dylan Hetherington. William Carrier, Tyler Bertuzzi, Arturi Lehkonen, and Zach Sanford all went after him. But that's only the draft. He still has the free agent period to come up, and he's got a couple of good young players that he can re-sign, like Sergei Bobrovsky and Artem Anisimov. But Kekalainen isn't done. He's big game hunting for a former Stanley Cup champion, Nathan Horton. He's had 3 very solid years in Boston and was a key contributor on that Cup run. He's entering the prime of his career, so it's not that bad of an idea to throw him a lengthy... Marian Gaborik may have been the big sexy acquisition last year, but he hasn't been producing like we hoped he would, so we'll ship him off to the LA Kings for Matt Fratton and a 2nd and 3rd round pick in upcoming drafts. We'll also acquire Nick Schultz to shore up the back end and make a swap with some minor league players. I doubt we're going to miss these guys, Dalton Smith and Jonathan Marchessault. That guy's just an undrafted free agent, the product of a previous era. We won't miss him. The Jackets actually managed to make the playoffs as a wildcard spot. Looking for their first ever playoff win in franchise history, they'll be facing Sidney Crosby and the Pittsburgh Penguins. This should be a great series. And you know what? The Blue Jackets kept it close in this series. They won a couple of games in overtime, including their first ever win in the playoffs as a franchise. They were just clearly outmatched, but at least they made the Penguins work for it. They'll be back. The 2014 NHL entry draft was pretty good for Kekalainen. You took Sonny Milano at 16th overall, and you didn't really pass up on any exceptional players after him. Yeah, you would have liked to have gotten Pastrnak at 25th overall, but a bunch of other teams whiffed on that too. And in round 3, you took your future starting goaltender Elvis Merzlikins, and that's pretty good. Even though you could have had Ilya Sorokin or Braden Point a couple of picks later. Alright, not that great, but you know, it's the 3rd round, you're taking dart throws. Still pretty good for Kekalainen. In the meantime, let's make another bold trade. Ship off RJ Umberger to Philly for Scotty Hartnell. He was a great gritty leader for the Flyers during their playoff runs, so he can help us get over the hump. And let's augment that grit and leadership even more by signing a guy entering his prime, a leader on the Rangers, Brandon Dubinsky. $6 million a year for 6 years is a hefty price to pay for a guy who's only cracked 50 points once, but he's entering his prime, and we're hoping that his offensive production is just going to get better with all the offensive talent we have. Unfortunately, the season gets off to a bad start as last year's gem of free agency Nathan Horton is diagnosed with a degenerative back disease. He'll miss the rest of the season, but hopefully he'll be back playing for the Blue Jackets soon. But you know whose backs are hurting? Nick Foligno, Ryan Johansson, and Scott Hartnell, and the rest of the forwards who are trying to counterbalance this god-awful defense. It's made up of a lot of veterans like James Wisniewski, Jack Johnson, and Fedor Tutin, but they are just all absolute anchors in their defensive zone, and Sergei Bobrovsky, while putting up a respectable .918 save percentage, just can't keep the pucks out. So smartly, the Jackets decide to sell. Kekalainen manages to get rid of Nathan Horton's awful contract now that he's injured by taking on an awfuler contract in David Clarkson's from the Leafs. James Wisniewski, who's been awful, gets shipped off to Anaheim along with a 3rd round pick in order to get back a couple of prospects and a 2nd round pick. The pick doesn't turn out to be much, but one of those young prospects turns out to be William Karlsson. Think he'll do well for you. Luckily, that poor performance netted Columbus a top 10 draft pick in a loaded 1st round, and they do a good job with the 8th overall pick by taking Zach Werenski. Then Kekalainen gets a hair up his butt and decides he has to move back up into the 1st round, swapping his 2nd and 3rd round picks to get the 29th overall pick and select Gabriel Karlsson. And he didn't pan out. It's not like there's anybody who was drafted right around there who turned out to be any good other than Sebastian Aho and Brandon Carlo and Rope Hintz. Also, these are the 3rd round pick that year to take Keegan Colasar, just 2 spots before Anthony Cirelli was picked. So, bit of a mixed bag. The draft is over, but Kekalainen doesn't want to have any more of these soft European boys. He makes another trade centered around Artem Anisimov and last year's 1st round pick, Marco Dano, that swaps them to Chicago in exchange for Brandon Saad. That's right, baby, even more grit and sandpaper. He also manages to keep Cam Atkinson from walking free agency, a very smart move since both he and Brandon Saad will co-share the team lead in points next year. And hey, when you got a great young goaltender like Sergei Bobrovsky, you gotta pay him, and a 4-year term isn't that bad at $7.425 million a year. Well, I hope Bob keeps putting up gaudy numbers like he did last year. He does not. The start of the 2015-16 season has been horrible. The Jackets are 0-7. Gotta blame somebody, so let's lay it at the feet of one of the only holdovers of the old regime. Todd Richards, thank you for your service and our first playoff wins as a franchise, but you can get the fuck out now.
You're fired.
And now Jarmo finally gets to hire his own coach. Let's see who he goes for. Maybe somebody who's coached a lot of hard-nosed teams, like those Rangers teams of the early 2010s that Kekalainen seems to be taking a lot of players from. If only there were somebody like that available. It's been a bit of a struggle in towards his first season, but we all know that he has a bit of a distinct style and he wants certain players that play his way on his team. There are still a few passengers on from Columbus's failed regimes that don't jive with Tortorella's system, so let's go ahead and get them up out of here. We'll start with Ryan Johansson. He's been called out by Torts a bunch of times for his inconsistency and he's been benched along the way. Asheville offered us their young stud defenseman in Seth Jones for him. It's like we're robbing them blind. Honestly, the swap worked out pretty well. Seth Jones became an all-star in Columbus, and Johansson was a consistent top 6 forward in Nashville who helped lead them in their cup run. Alright, things haven't been working out with all of these veterans that we've added, so it's time to make some room for the younger kids to come up and play. Seth Jones will be one of the anchors of our blue line for a long time, along with that Werenski kid we drafted a few years back. Sonny Milano, Oliver Bjorkstrand, and Alexander Wenberg, they should be getting more opportunities in the NHL right now. We also got that Karlsson kid that we picked up a few years back, along with some other young kids like Boone Jenner and Josh Anderson, who can round out the forward core. It's going to be hard for them to push out established vets like Atkinson, Saad, Foligno, and Hartnell, but the wave of the future is coming. Holy Christ, I can't believe I'm saying this, but the Blue Jackets are, like, good. Like, really good. 50 wins and 108 points on the season? That is incredibly impressive. Their scoring may not be elite, but my god, Sergei Bobrovsky is playing up to that contract. .931 save percentage, and a Vezina Trophy win. The only problem is that they are in maybe the toughest division in hockey, going up against the President's Trophy Capitals and the Pittsburgh Penguins, which means as the 3rd seed, they end up facing their old friends Pittsburgh in the first round again. Hopefully this will be a great series just like last time. No, unfortunately it turns out that the Monstars stole Sergei Bobrovsky's talent before the first game, and he reversed into a pumpkin with an .882 save percentage in the 5-game series. Nobody could score still, and the Penguins dropped the Blue Jackets in an easy 4-1 series win, on their way to the Stanley Cup. Kekalainen finally realizes that having all of those grinder guys in the middle 6 is great, but you need somebody who can actually score to give your team a chance in the playoff. He goes big game hunting once again, this time trading Brandon Saad to the Chicago Blackhawks for a young stud sniper Artemi Panarin. But there's this newfangled expansion team coming into the league. The Vegas Golden Knights are going to be entering the NHL soon. We got to make sure we're protecting our best players like Josh Anderson and Scott Hartnell, who we will buy out of the remainder of his contract about 2 weeks after this deal gets done. Vegas will agree to take on our first-round pick this year, along with that David Clarkson contract that's been weighing us down, freeing up some cap room for us to make the Panarin trade. All we have to give up in exchange is that young Carlson kid. It does sting, yes, but we got that young Pierre-Luc Dubois kid who we took in the first round of the 2016 draft coming up. Plus, between Anderson and Jenner and Wenberg and Milano coming up, we're loaded on forwards. We're not going to miss him. It turns out that, in fact, yes, you would end up missing Wild Bill Karlsson, who would become a key contributor on Vegas going to the Stanley Cup in their first year, and then winning a Stanley Cup years later. But who cares about that, because adding Panarin was an absolutely genius move by Kekalainen. 82 points in 81 games this season, including 27 goals. Pierre-Luc Dubois stepped up as a 19-year-old with 48 points and 20 goals. Bjorkstrand, Wenberg, Werenski, Jenner, and Anderson are all stepping up and making huge contributions early on, and Seth Jones is establishing himself as a top pairing defenseman. The Jackets only have a 97-point season this year because, again, the Metro Division is just loaded, but Bobrovsky is once again in as a consideration with a .921 save percentage. This year you avoid the Penguins in the first round and are going to get a chance to win your first playoff series against the perennial chokers, the Capitals. Come on, you got this. And look at that, you win the first 2 games of the series, you're coming back on home ice with a 2-0 series lead. This is your chance to make history, boys. And no, you just lost 4 straight and managed to outchoke the Capitals. Managing to not be the chokers for once, the Capitals took that energy, ran through the Eastern Conference, and managed to win their first ever Stanley Cup. Thank you so much for that. But with great power comes the need to re-sign your core contributors to big contracts. Time to hand out a 6-year deal to Alex Wenberg at about $5 million a year, 3 years at $1.85 for Josh Anderson, 7 years at $5.8 million to Cam Atkinson. Ooh, Lord! And Boone Jenner and Oliver Bjorkstrand will get their bridge deals after that playoff run. But man, this team isn't letting that playoff failure get them down. They are still red hot, led by Artemi Panarin, a 40-goal campaign from Cam Atkinson. Pierre-Luc Dubois could be becoming a 60-point player, and key contributions from Anderson, Seth Jones, Werenski, Jenner, Bjorkstrand, and the veterans Nick Foligno and Brandon Dubinsky. But it feels like this team is still missing something. Ooh, Dowkey, swapping a couple of conditional first-round picks and prospects with the Ottawa Senators to get Matt Duchene, and then adding young Ryan DeSingle a day later in a separate trade with Ottawa. This team looks loaded. Unfortunately, now that the Islanders have Barry Trotz behind the bench and the Caps and Penguins are still, juggernauts, all the Columbus Blue Jackets managed to muster is 98 points and a wildcard spot, which puts them in a matchup with basically God. The Tampa Bay Lightning are the best team of the NHL. 62-win season, the Vezina Trophy winner between the Pipes and Andrei Vasilevsky, and a plus 100 goal differential. The attitude for most NHL fans is, thanks for trying, Columbus, give it your best shot, but we'll see you on the golf course in a couple weeks. And in maybe one of the greatest upsets / chokes of all time, the Columbus Blue Jackets get their first playoff series win in franchise history over the President's Trophy winning juggernaut, the Tampa Bay Lightning. And we all collectively laughed. Thank you, Jackets. Unfortunately, this is the year the bill becomes due. The Breadman and Bobrovsky both move on in free agency, Brandon Dubinsky retires, and Matt Duchene goes ring chasing in Nashville. It's definitely a down year for Columbus, but they've still been fairly solid. They're not as prolific in the scoring department, but with Pierre-Luc Dubois and Oliver Bjorkstrand, they're still at least respectable. Plus, they're not really missing Bob and net with 2 young stud goaltenders in Jonas Korpisalo and Elvis Merzlikins. But then the global pandemic. The hockey world is stopped as the world reels from COVID-19. Play resumes months later in a bubble, and the course of the season is fundamentally altered. There will be a new play-in format for the playoffs, which Columbus does manage to qualify for. Unfortunately, they are also going up against the Death Star that is the Toronto Maple Leafs, and it's unlikely that they still have any more of that luck of the Irish that they used to beat Tampa Bay from last year. They're probably going to get dispatched easily by the Leafs. Never mind, the Leafs can out-choke anybody. Congratulations, Columbus, you've won another playoff series. Your reward is getting your shit pushed in by Tampa Bay, who have not forgotten how you humiliated them last year. But honestly, given the craziness of this season, pretty good. Some of these young homegrown talents that we've picked up haven't exactly developed on our way, so it's time to ship them out for some new blood. Sonny Milano's been concussed all the time. We'll ship him off to Anaheim in exchange for Devon Shore. Basically just a contract dump. We like Josh Anderson, but he's not coming back, so we'll flip his rights over to Montreal in exchange for Max Domi. And also, we really agreed to pay Ryan Murray $4.6 million a year. Well, that's a mistake that must be rectified. Here in New Jersey, you can have him. And hey, we got another one of those first-round pick things that we haven't had in a while. Let's use it on that Yegor Chinakhov player. He seems like he could be good. Alright, time to give Pierre-Luc Dubois his bridge extension. 2 years, $10 million, pretty solid deal. But now that bridge has come down for Bjorkstrand, it's time to give him his big boy raise. 5 years, $5.4 million a year, that's pretty good. But it appears $5 million a year isn't enough to keep Pierre-Luc Dubois happy. He gives no fucks, takes the laziest shift in the world, and we decide to ship him off to Siberia in exchange for Patrik Laine and Jack Roslovic. Thank you for taking this cancer, Winnipeg. This surely won't come back to haunt you. Unfortunately, even with Laine in this shortened season, the Columbus Blue Jackets are to offense what the DCU is to cinema. An absolute abomination. The fire sale is on, and it starts behind the bench. Sean Tortorella, thank you for all your years of service and getting us out of the first round a couple of times, but the players have clearly gotten tired of your shtick and you haven't made the playoffs, so you can get the hell out of here. You're fired! Tortorella was a bully. He didn't let Jarmo build the team the way he wanted. Sure, they had great success, but this is Jarmo's team now. He needs a yes man who can do everything that he tells him. I know, how about one of Torts' old assistants? It'll be like Tortorella's still there, but with the added bonus of less assholishness and contradicting what Kekalainen says. And now Kekalainen's going to start ripping things down to the studs to rebuild. David Savard, you can get the hell out of here in a 3-way deal so that we can pick up another first-round pick. We'll get another first-rounder from San Jose in exchange for Nick Foligno, and then package Seth Jones with one of those late first-round picks that we just got, and ship him to Chicago in exchange for Adam Boqvist and 2 first-round picks. We could also get rid of that long-term deal we signed Cam Atkinson to a few years back by eating the contract of an old friend. Jacob Voracek, welcome back. We'll take your over $8 million cap hit and sell some of those old jerseys while Philly eats the remainder of Atkinson's deal. And so for all that wheeling and dealing, Columbus ends up with 3 first-round picks in 2021, managing to select Kent Johnson at pick number 5, Cole Sillinger at pick 12, and Corson Kulamins at pick 25. And hey, Jarmo learned from his mistake in the last expansion draft, protecting his key players and letting go journeyman Gavin Bayreuther. He also makes sure to re-up Boone Jenner and Elvis Merzlikins for another 5 years. I really hope Elvis is ready to take over the number 1 spot. Hey, the Jackets were surprisingly competitive in 2021-22. Jacob Voracek's homecoming was a success with 62 points in 79 games. Bjorkstrand has established himself as a top 6 player. Patrik Laine had a 26-goal season. Boone Jenner cements himself as one of the great leaders in Blue Jackets history. Unsung signing Gustav Nyquist put up 50 points, and they've even started to find some young, promising defensemen like Vlad Gavrikov, Jake Bean, and Adam Boqvist, who they acquired in that Seth Jones deal. The only problem is that, yeah, Elvis is not set to be the number 1 goalie. I mean, he kind of has to by default because Jonas Korpisalo has completely imploded this year, but yeah, Columbus's defense and goaltending can't stop a nosebleed this year. More spring cleaning in the offseason as the Blue Jackets ship off Max Domi and Oliver Bjorkstrand, one of their better players, for a couple of picks to Seattle. The unsung signing Gustav Nyquist also shipped off to Minnesota. Okay, once again, the Columbus Blue Jackets have multiple first-round picks, this time 2 in the top 15. Taking Juracek at pick 6 is a chalk pick, so good on them for doing that. And doubling up on defenseman with Denton Mateychuk at pick 12. But a couple of years without the playoffs have really irked Kekalainen. He needs a big fish, but nobody seems to really be on his radar. Like the Red October, Kekalainen submerges and waits out his prey, emerging triumphantly with the prize of free agency, Johnny Hockey. Patrik Laine is also due for an extension coming up, and sure, he's never been the 30 or 40 goal guy that we all envisioned him to be, so we can sign him for a pretty reasonable fuck me. You're giving him almost $9 million? And adding Johnny Hockey did nothing because we have a bunch of sieves still between the pipes. Doesn't matter if it's Korpisalo, Merzlikins, Tarasov, Hutchinson, whoever we trot out there can't stop a beach ball. Hey, Columbus will give us Jonathan Quick and a first-round pick for Jonas Korpisalo? And all we gotta give up is Vlad Gavrikov, who is severely regressed this year? Too good to be true. Oh, and Arizona will take on Voracek's contract? Well, the homecoming was nice, Jake. It's nice to know you. Have fun in the desert. Shocker of all shockers, the goaltending musical chairs does nothing, and the Columbus Blue Jackets not only failed to make the playoffs again, they finished last in the Eastern Conference. Well, somebody's going to go down for this failure, and it's certainly not going to be Jarmo. Brad Larson, enjoy the pink slip. You're fired! You know what? Kekalainen is getting a little bit antsy. He's had all these first-round picks, and they just haven't worked out. Let's trade one of them for a proven defenseman in Ivan Provorov, and then trade some more picks to get back Damon Severson from the Devils. I'm sure there's no reason that our in-division rivals are fine giving up these established players, having to face them multiple times a year. Now that Larson's gone, Kekalainen needs a new coach. He can't go the yes-man route once again. He needs an established voice, because it worked well with Tortorella. I know, how about a guy with all the abrasiveness of Tortorella without any of the recent success? Mike Babcock, welcome to Columbus.
Oh, you're gonna regret doing that!
For about a Scaramucci and a half. Yeah, it turns out players really don't like Babcock and his insistence on going through their phones.
Bye-bye!
Just kidding, Pascal was the guy we wanted all along. Quick, distract our owner with this shiny Adam Fantilli we just drafted. And the distraction does not work as Kekalainen is fired halfway through the 2023-24 season. Another mediocre, disappointing season for the Blue Jackets. Man, if there was one word I could use to describe Kekalainen's entire reign as the GM of the Columbus Blue Jackets, it would have to be inconsistency. The guy clearly had a vision for how he wanted to build a hockey team, and he did manage to build teams that were consistently competitive with the right coach. The problem was when he didn't have those coaches, things went really bad really fast. And honestly, his drafting, trading, and signing record is spotty, but not nearly as terrible as I thought it would be. He may have missed on a few home runs early in his career, but he got better at drafting as the years went along. As far as trades, I don't really think he made any big mistakes other than not protecting William Karlsson in the Vegas expansion. One of his big downfalls was getting up on prospects too early, but at the same time, Columbus always seemed to be loaded with young upcoming talent. And bash him all you want, but he did lead the Blue Jackets to their most successful stretch in franchise history. If I was a team out there needing a GM this offseason, would I consider Kekalainen? Honestly, I probably would. Pair him with the right coach who is aligned with him on his vision for a team, and maybe surround him with some stronger amateur scouts. I think he could go from being a decent GM to a pretty good one. But honestly, once Babcock was fired, that was the beginning of the end for Kekalainen. You can't screw up your third big head coaching hire that badly and expect to survive on a team that is losing ground in a very competitive division. It was the right move for the Blue Jackets to move on, and they honestly have a pretty good job opening for a GM who wants to come in. They've got some good prospects, a good amount of draft capital, a decent amount of cap room, and some good players signed long term. You figure out the goaltending situation and shore up the defense, this team could turn around pretty quickly with the young talent they have on their team, and I'd be excited for that opportunity if I was a young up-and-coming executive.